So we are going into the intro to CSS today. So some of this might be a recap for some people. This might be the absolute beginning, something totally new. Hopefully this has something interesting for everybody as we go into this. Also, on Wednesday, it was Colin's birthday. So happy birthday to Colin out there in Scotland.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Yeah, dude. Love you, man.
Love you too.
Okay. Cool. So we are talking about CSS today. So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And we're going to talk more about why they're called cascading. Style sheets is that they are styling content on our pages, and they make the web awesome. So what we're going to be doing today, I want today's lesson to be a little bit more follow along heavy to make this a little bit more interesting. So if everybody can go ahead and make sure you open up StackBlitz, where we're going to be coding today. And we're just going to start with a fresh project. We're not going to be forking anything. So once you get into stackblitz.com, hopefully you're logged in. So you should be able to see your icon in the top right. And we are going to create a static HTML, JavaScript, CSS. We're going to click on that static icon there, which that's basically just a basic app. All these other ones are kind of templates for different libraries and frameworks. So if we click on static, we should see our window in the right-hand side. And this is kind of just the default that StackBlitz creates. Let's go ahead and you don't need to worry about this me.html file. I'm going to delete that just so we don't have any confusion. I'm also going to delete the JavaScript file because we aren't going to need that at all. And let's delete the styles.css because we want to kind of create this from scratch. So ideally, you should have a index.html file set up and only that one file. And for the sake of practice, I would encourage everybody to just go ahead and delete all the HTML that we have there, because we are going to want to be writing this from scratch and kind of practicing what we went over in the last class as far as HTML goes. Okay, so now while everybody is kind of getting that set up as well, I wanted to share something. See, copy link address. I'm going to share another link in Slack here. So this is a website that is a developer's portfolio site, and it's really heavily styled. It has a lot of CSS, a lot of animations, a lot of crazy cool stuff going on. And if you guys have a chance after you get your StackBlitz set up, while everybody's doing that, go ahead and follow that link and take a look at this guy's website. It's really cool. Just an example of, you know, some of the powerful things we can do with CSS here. And then also, did everyone get the DevTools Chrome extension that I slacked out installed? It doesn't take very long if we need to do that. So I'm going to slack that out as well really quick in the general channel. So whoever didn't add this Chrome extension, go ahead and do that as well. So we're going to open up this dude's website, get your StackBlitz going, and download this Chrome extension if you don't have it. Okay, so if you guys do have his page open, or can you guys still see my screen, by the way?
Yes.
Also, which screen are you seeing? Are you seeing Slack? Or are you seeing?
I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name, but the freelance developer.
Yana Capiolas. I have no idea who this guy is. I just found his website on design portfolio site. He's from Athens, Greece. Okay, so if we look at this site, he's got a bunch of cool stuff. He's got this following mousey hover thing. You click on it, has a cool little animation. Everything's got hovers, and he's scroll jacking and do a ton of stuff. It just seems amazing that somebody could even pull this off and do this on the web at all. So you can dig around in here, a lot of cool things going on, a lot of visual action happening, a lot of colors, interaction. For everybody who does have the Chrome extension installed, did anybody have trouble with that? Everybody who wanted to install that, did that work for them?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. Alrighty. So if you're in Chrome, you should be able to just go over here and click on this little puzzle piece thing into your extensions. Go ahead and click on that web developer one, and you should see a window like this open up. And in that window that pops up, we're going to click on the CSS tab. And then in the CSS tab, you should have an option called Disable All Styles. That's the first thing that pops up. Let's go ahead and click that. So if you do click Disable All Styles, you should see a little X show up next to it, check mark. And you can click out and you should see the website change. So what you're looking at now, we are now looking at his website with just his pure HTML setup. You can scroll down, there's some giant images that haven't been sized correctly. We see, you know, the system font showing up for how the browser renders this, some normal link tags. We see a little bit of movement because some JavaScript he's probably using. We see some headers, a bunch of text. It just looks super, super boring, and it's totally plain. And there's really nothing going on except for these pictures he has and some normal HTML elements that probably look pretty familiar to you at this point. Just seeing text like this in this kind of font style. So this is kind of a fun thing to go through and find websites that you really like or enjoy, or seeing how they work. And just disable the CSS styles on them. And you can see how the bones of a website are really just the HTML, and how powerful CSS is, that you can go from, you know, just this text, like really all it is text and images, and you can turn it into such an amazing interactive experience with CSS. So I kind of wanted to share that, a little bit of like a reverse, you know, kind of a backwards look at how CSS can build incredible things. You guys can try that out on other websites if you want right now, whatever you're doing. So I just wanted to start with that. Okay, let's go back over to our slides. Okay. Cool. All righty. So let's go back over to StackBlitz.com. And we have, hopefully at this point, you should have just an empty index.html file. And in our last class, we learned some terminology, some syntax. We may, I don't know how much of that stuck with you guys, probably have forgotten some of those specifics, but we'll go over it again. We're gonna continue to write HTML, continue to do this over and over again. This repetition will help to kind of drive this, the syntax and how we write these things into our heads. So we're gonna build on what we learned last time. And today, what our project is, kind of what we're gonna do together in class, and then also homework-wise, is we're gonna be building a joke website. So we're gonna build a website that you have a title, that you have a header tag, and then you have a setup, so a div or a paragraph tag or something that has your setup for your joke that has text in it. And then you're gonna have another div that's gonna have another paragraph or a span tag in it. And then that's gonna have your punchline. And we're gonna hopefully have it set up so that you can hide the punchline in some way. So then you're gonna hover over something or scroll maybe to reveal the punchline. And we're gonna do this in StackBlitz. You're gonna be coming up with your own joke or finding a joke online or whatever and adding it in here. And we're gonna build the HTML together. And then the homework part is going to be all the CSS. We're gonna have you go in and style it and change it however you like. We'll have an example to show at the end. But we're gonna do the HTML together here, and it'll be an opportunity to kind of practice some of the syntax we learned last time. If you need the base HTML template, if you get lost or get stuck behind as we're following along here, I'm gonna post that in Slack. So if you need to copy that, you should be able to grab that from GitHub over in the code examples section in the Dev Delta class. Cool. So let's go ahead and let's do this. So the first piece of an HTML document is always the doc type. And this is something that we briefly went over. This isn't something you really need to worry about too often. This is something you can look up or just copy paste. A lot of things will already have this built into it. But this is going to just tell our browser what type of document it's working with, and it prevents it from running in what's called quirks mode, which we don't really need to worry about right now. And for the sake of StackBlitz, because StackBlitz has some bugs, we are actually going to comment this out as we go. But this is the very first piece of an HTML document normally. To comment, we're going to hold command and hit /. And that's going to go ahead and comment out. If we hit command and / again, then it's going to uncomment. And that's a handy shortcut for all different kind of files that we're working in, HTML, CSS, or JavaScript. We'll automatically use the different syntax for comments. So, okay, that's our first line there. So now now that we're actually getting into our HTML here, we are going to write an opening HTML tag. I'll have you guys try to go ahead and do that on your side before I show it here. So the opening HTML tag. That's going to be bracket, HTML, and then the close bracket. So that's just the opening tag. So if we wanted to make this a complete HTML element, the only missing piece to make this a full element is the closing tag. So let's write the closing HTML tag. So the closing tag is going to be almost exactly the same as the opening tag. It just has a / indicating that it is a closing tag at the end. So if our HTML, if there is an HTML element that has an opening and a closing tag, we know that it contains content. If an HTML element does not have a closing tag and it is called a self-closing tag, then we know that it doesn't contain any content. So we know that there's stuff that goes inside of our HTML here. So if we hit enter, it should automatically indent. And that's showing us that this is nested. So now we are nested inside of our HTML element. And we are actually still missing one piece on here though. So we need to add an attribute to our opening HTML tag. Sorry, I was jumping ahead there. So we're going to add the lang attribute, and we're going to assign it the value of en-us. The lang attribute assigned to the value of en-us. And the US is capitalized. So as we go along here, there might be some tags or there might be some attributes that you're unfamiliar with. And that's okay. It doesn't really, what we're practicing here is the terminology. We're not practicing that you've memorized anything. So basically when I say, if we're practicing, writing tags and I say, write a foobar tag, then you would say, okay, I know it starts with a bracket. We're going to write foobar, and then that's the opening tag. If I said write the foobar element, then you need to close it with the ending tag. So that's not valid HTML, but just for the sake of practice, that's what we're practicing here. We're practicing, what do you write when we're talking about different syntax? And when we talk about an attribute, we say, okay, I know an attribute goes inside of the opening tag. There's a space after the title of the tag. And then we have the name of the attribute. And then when we say assign, we're doing that equal sign. And then we know there's always an opening quote and a close quote. And then the value of the attribute is whatever is inside of those quotes. So that's what we're really doing here, is kind of just practicing writing on our own and then thinking about what the names and the terminologies for the things we're doing are. Okay, now that we have our HTML tag set up and we know that we're telling the browser that the language this document is going to be in is English, we are going to create a head element, the HTML head element. So we're going to do an opening tag. We're going to do this on a new line for the closing tag, because we know that there is going to be content inside of here. So last time we mentioned this briefly, I don't know if you guys remember, but the head tag or the head element, everything inside of the head element here, everything that's nested inside of the head element, this is information for the browser. So nothing inside of the head element is going to be rendered to our page over here. We're not going to see anything show up in our browser displayed to the user that goes inside of our head element. This is basically kind of like metadata and information for the browser to process. And does anybody remember one of the main tags or one of the primary elements that goes inside of the head element?
Body.
The body tag,
Sorry,
or the
title.
body element? The title, yes. Yep. So the title element does go inside of the head tag because that tells the browser what name to display on our little tab up here. So let's go ahead and do that. Good work, Kyra. So let's add a title element. And usually we do these on the same line because usually the title is pretty short. That doesn't need to be broken down into a new line. And we're going to call this your joke page because that's what we're building here. You guys can obviously change and update, make this whatever you want. Okay, so we have our title. There is one other element that goes into the head here that is necessary for a valid HTML document, and that is the meta element. So the meta element or the meta tag is self-closing. So let's write a self-closing meta tag. And when we talk about a self-closing tag, that really just means that it's a tag that is completely contained within its opening tag. So the meta element is a single tag like this. And we are going to add a char set attribute on CHARSET. So we're going to add a char set attribute, and we're going to assign that to the value of UTF-8. And that stands for character set, to tell the browser what kind of characters we're going to be using to type into our HTML document here. UTF-8. Cool. Okay, so we're getting our head element set up here. We have two other elements inside of it. There is one more element that's going to go here, but we are going to jump down now and we're going to look at our next element. Can somebody tell me what the next element you would usually put into an HTML document here? This is where most of our stuff would live.
Body.
The body tag. Yeah, exactly. So let's do the body tag. And if everybody is feeling comfortable with writing opening and closing tags, one thing that VSCode does, which that's what this this text editor we're using here that's built into the web, this is VSCode, is you can just type the name of the tag. So for example, we're doing body, and you don't have to do your opening bracket or your closing bracket, and then you can hit tab, and that will automatically open and close your HTML element. If you feel like you need more practice with the closing slash or writing the opening and closing tag, feel free to go ahead and do that. But this is a good shortcut, since when you're writing HTML, you're doing a lot of opening and closing brackets and closing tags. It can get kind of tedious. Okay, so we have our body tag. We don't need to add any attributes to this right now. We can. It can accept a lot of different attributes, but we're going to leave it as is. Inside of our body tag, let's add a heading level 1 element. Okay, since it's an element, we can hit tab to get our opening and closing tags. And we're going to put some content inside of it. Tell me a joke. Cool. Okay, next up, we are going to create a main element. Create a main element. Okay. So the main element, this basically is just telling the browser that semantically, everything inside of this tag is the primary portion of our document. So this is the main area that everything is going to live in. And one other thing that's really cool about VS Code is that you can actually hover over these tags, and it will give you a little tooltip that pops up that tells you what the MDN definition of them is. So the main element represents the main content of the body of a document or application. The main content area consists of content that is directly related to or expands upon the central topic of a document or central functionality of an application. So that's something that's really handy. If you do run across, some HTML you've copy and pasted, or something that you're curious about, or you forgot what it does, you can just hover over it, and VS Code will actually tell you what that element is and what it does, which is kind of cool. Okay. Inside of our main element, we are going to create two div elements, two separate div elements, and let's make those siblings. And when I say siblings, that means they're not nested inside of each other. They are next to each other on the same level, basically, of indentation. Okay, now inside of each div element, well, actually, let's just do the first one. Inside of the first div element, we are going to put a paragraph tag, a paragraph element, opening and closing paragraph tag. And that is just a P. Oh, that didn't work. There we go. So the P tag, this is going to be one of the most commonly used tags you use. This is where most chunks of text or paragraphs, like the name implies, will live. So in here, this is where our punchline would live. We're going to do knock knock. So knock knock is our content inside of our paragraph tag, paragraph element. Now in our second div, let's go ahead and add an emphasized element. The emphasized element is just EM, is the name of the element, the name of the tags. And inside of the EM, we're going to put our punchline, which this is a sample, so there's no punchline. Actually, okay, we'll add a real joke in here. So be thinking about jokes because you're going to have to put jokes in your own. Did you hear about the mathematician who hated negative numbers? He'd stop. That's good. That gets me. That cracked me up yesterday. Okay. Okay, sweet. So if we look at this document, we have built a valid HTML document from scratch, from the ground up, which is awesome. That's something people don't usually do. Usually they will go copy and paste the template, or they have their development environment set up so that they can just click a bunch of buttons and they have like 60 files created from scratch. So what we're doing here, this is actually kind of a unique skill. I would almost argue that a lot of developers don't really remember how to do this stuff because it's so basic. And they may actually forget that you are supposed to start an HTML element or document with the doctype of HTML, or that you need to add the language attribute, or when they're talking about, you know, the syntax here, they may stumble over how to talk about tags and closing tags and elements and attributes and values and things like that. So this is really good. This is good to learn. It may seem super basic. It may seem like something you're never going to use in the future, but it's really good to know. And it's really good to know how to talk about it out loud as well. Okay. So we built ourselves a base HTML document. That's awesome. So now you're thinking, why are we doing all this HTML crap when we're here for CSS? So we're going to get into CSS now, one last piece in our HTML. So our HTML document is going to be rendered onto the page, which we see here on the right-hand side. There is no styling. This is all just kind of basic browser stuff that's built in. This is larger text because we put it in a heading level 1 tag. And then this is just regular paragraph stuff. This is italicized because we put that inside of an emphasis element. And the emphasis element, if we hover over it, represents stress emphasis of its content. So it stresses that with the italicizing of it. Okay, but we want to put some styles into here. There are multiple ways that we could add styling into an HTML document. There's actually 3 of them. There's inline. We could also do it within the style HTML element. And then there is the external style sheets. For the sake of best practice and for the sake of this lesson, we're going to do the external style sheet. That's what you're most commonly going to see. And there are some other issues and problems you can run into with the other 2 types. The lesson plan and the curriculum in the DevDelta GitHub has details on all that stuff and some links you can follow if you want to read more about those. But for now, we're going to do an external style sheet. So if our style sheet is external, that means it's external to our HTML. So we're not writing styles in the HTML itself. So what we need to do is in the folder we're working in. So we're working in this directory or this folder called files here. So let's create a new file. And we're going to do that with hovering over that files thing and then hit that little plus page. And we're going to create a new file, and it's going to be called styles.css. So the real key there is just the file extension name of .css. And you'll see that the 3 shows up to the left of that. And that's because we are working in CSS3. This is HTML5 and CSS3, just different versions of the language as it's developed over time. So we've created a blank styles.css document now. And we could write some styling in here and say, something like body, background color. Let's do orange. Okay, we're going to go over the syntax in a little bit, so don't worry. You can just copy this word for word. So type body and then space and then an opening curly brace, return to a new line, type background dash color, colon, and then any color you want, any normal color. And then you need to put a semicolon at the end of that. And then on your new line, on the third line, you're going to put a closing curly brace. So this is our first little piece of CSS where we've written. And we're going to, like I said, we'll talk about the syntax here. So don't worry about, we're not glossing over anything yet. Okay, so we've written some CSS. We said we want to make the background color of body something orange, but we didn't see anything happen. And the reason is because there's no connection between those two documents. So our index.html and our styles.css, they have no idea that each other exist, and they have no idea how to communicate with each other. So we need to create that bridge. And the way that we're going to do that is with a link. We're going to use a link element. So there is an HTML link element. Let's create an HTML link element right here in our head element. And also to note that the HTML link element is a self-closing tag, similar to the meta tag. Okay, so this is how we create that tag. It is incomplete at this point in time because the link element requires two attributes. It requires a rel attribute, that's REL, and it requires an href attribute, that's HREF. So let's add a rel attribute and an href attribute to our link tag. Okay, so if you did something like this, that's great. We haven't put values into our attributes yet, but we have set them up as valid attributes with just empty strings or assigned to empty strings. So in this link, it's still not linked to our CSS. It doesn't know what it's doing yet. We need to tell it a couple things. The first thing is rel is relationship. So we need to tell it what is the relationship of this link, because the link tag can be used to basically connect other types of documents into the HTML. And in this case, we want to link in a style sheet. So we're going to tell it that this relationship is specifically for a style sheet. So we're going to type style sheet into the rel attribute as the value there. Now the href, which is the hypertext reference, this is going to be, this could be something on the web. It could be local right here where we are. You might recognize that attribute from the anchor tag, which is the link tag that when you click on it, it takes you, either somewhere within your own page or somewhere else on the internet. So it is a hypertext reference. And in this case, it's right here where we are. So we can just say that by typing the name of our CSS file, which is styles.css. So it's basically saying, okay, I know that it's right here. It's not prefixed with like an https://google.com/ some stuff /styles.css. If this was where our CSS file lived, if this was actually hosted on the web somewhere, we could do something like this, and we could use the href to link out to an external style sheet, external to our application even. But in this case, it's not. It isn't. It doesn't have a protocol, and it's not on the web. It's just right here where we are. So we're just going to put that in. And hopefully you should see your background turn orange on the right-hand side within your StackBlitz editor. Okay, did anybody have trouble getting to this point? Or are they not seeing that orange background show up? Okay, I take your silence as a good sign. Cool. Okay, so we've created an HTML file. We've created a CSS file. We've connected them to each other. We've written a little bit of CSS that we don't totally understand yet. We haven't gotten over that. That's okay. But we've added a link element that connects those things together. That's awesome. We've done a lot so far. This is good. Okay. So we went over the link tag in the head. We went over the attributes of rel and href. We created our HTML file and we tested our connection by making the background of the body the color orange. Cool. Okay. Now, we're going to go a little bit into the syntax of CSS and how we write valid CSS. There isn't a ton of syntax here that we need to memorize, which is really nice. CSS is a fairly simple language in learning the constraints of how you write it, but there's a lot of complexity as to how you can combine these pieces together to do amazing things. So the first thing we're going to look at is rules, what a CSS rule is. A CSS rule is built of a selector and a block. That's really pretty much it. The selector is the part of your CSS that targets your HTML. So we notice that the background of our page turned orange when we put that body in there and then that curly brace. But the text didn't turn orange. The text stayed black because we selected, picked and choose a specific part of our HTML to target. And then we have the block, which is another part of a rule. So the block, it begins at the opening curly brace and it ends with the closing curly brace. When we talk about a CSS block, we're always talking about what's between the curly braces. And throughout programming, you'll actually hear that term used a lot for content between curly braces, even in JavaScript. So that is a block. It's good to just remember that a block is what's between the curly braces. So let's go back over. And if we look at our CSS file here, we can see that this is our selector. And if you hover over, it actually says selector and it shows you what tag it's targeting as well, which is kind of cool. So actual bonus feature there. And then the block is everything between lines 1 and line 3. So this is a block here that does that. CSS files are built of multiple blocks. So let's say, for example, we wanted to turn our text red. Then we would use a new selector that's going to target the HTML. And when we are using a tag or an element selector, it's pretty much just the same name as whatever the tag is. So let's try to change the paragraph tag, all of the content inside of our paragraph tag to be the color red. And we're going to do that by writing a paragraph selector and kind of use this as a hint here. So it's really just the name of the tag. And then we're going to create a block. And inside of that, we'll just kind of copy this syntax here where you're going to put color. So here we've created a valid CSS block. And then we're going to do color red. Okay. And we'll go over this syntax here for this, everything inside of the block in just a second here. But you should see the first line change to red. Does anybody know why the heat stop and nothing to avoid them part, why the italicized section did not turn red? Does anybody have a theory?
Because you didn't do it for M for that line.
Exactly. Yep. So the reason this didn't change, even though it just looks like normal text or like it's potentially even part of the same paragraph when you look at what's output on the page, our HTML is built so that the element is the EM, the emphasized, just like Sean said. Yep. So that's why that didn't turn red, but our first line did because we're only targeting the paragraph tag. Now, what if we had another paragraph tag? Let's go ahead and add one in and test it out. So this is a test and see what happens. So if we have another paragraph tag, we see that that also turned red. Now, what if it was nested inside of something? Interesting. Okay, so we notice now, and we've by some trial and error here, we see that every paragraph tag we have, even if it's nested deep inside of another element, is going to be targeted by the CSS. So the CSS can see deep into our HTML to find every element that we're styling. So in this example, it managed to find all of those paragraph tags. So that's something good to keep in mind, is that when we say this, we're not talking about just the first one. We're not talking about the last one. We're not talking about ones that are not nested. This is every single instance of that tag or that element inside of your HTML will be targeted by your CSS to execute whatever you put inside of your block. So to recap, we have the selector, and then we have the block, the CSS block. Those are two of the main pieces of the syntax. And in a CSS document, you're going to have a bunch. It's just basically a bunch of blocks of CSS, a bunch of different blocks that target different things. And that's how CSS is structured. You usually put a space between them to do your next one. So if you wanted to do a span, you would do it like that. And you'd create a new block, and then you would write your CSS to target it inside of there. Cool, cool. So let's look at this quick annotated slide here to kind of dig in a little bit more. There's a new piece of syntax here called the declaration that we see, but we do see that our rule is the whole thing. So the whole shebang is the rule. We have our selector, we have the block, which is the curlies, and then everything inside of those curlies. So that is a CSS rule. And we have a bunch of different rules we add together. So I misspoke before when I said that you have multiple blocks. You do have multiple blocks, but really what they are is rules, which is a block attached to a selector inside of our CSS over and over again, just a bunch of these. So the declaration is what we wrote to actually change what the content looks like on our page. And a declaration is always the name of what we're doing, and then a colon, and then whatever value that takes, which usually it's multiple different kinds of values. Sometimes it's pixels, sometimes it's inches, or distances, or colors, or sizes, or borders. There's a ton of different things you can do with it. And then a semicolon marks the end of the line. It basically says like, okay, this is the end of this specific piece that we're editing here. And really, if we look at this here, this is pretty much it. This pretty much sums up CSS. If you've done any CSS in the past, you know that it's pretty simple as far as this piece goes. So like learning how to actually start manipulating your page is fast. You get up and running really quickly, which is awesome. And that makes CSS fun, I think, and I really like it. So there's not a whole lot more that you need to learn syntactically other than what we see in this slide here about the rules, selectors, declarations, and the blocks. We didn't talk about specific specific declarations as far as like what all you can do. And part of the reason is because there's a ton of them. There's a million things you can do with CSS and a million different ways you can write declarations to target different things. And mainly when you're writing CSS, you want to know, okay, I know how to select what I want to change. So you can write that syntax. And then you say, okay, I want to open and close a block, a CSS block, so that I can make changes inside of that. And then usually where you go from there is instead of having everything memorized, understanding and knowing CSS isn't necessarily about having all of these things memorized. It's mostly about being able to say, okay, well, I want to change it so that the font size is bigger and that it's a different kind of font family, and I also wanted to have a red background. So you might know some of that, and you might be able to type that into your CSS block, but a lot of it you might have to just look up, and then you're just going to Google it. You're going to be like, okay, how to turn the background of a div red, and that the practice of the best way to Google things to look up your problems is something that will come with time. But that's a great practice because that's where you start, and you'll find that if you're using a lot of these often, you're going to start memorizing them, and you'll be able to put them into your CSS blocks quickly. And then some of them you'll forget, and you'll have to look up the syntax, and that's fine. So we're not actually going to go over all of the declarations that exist for CSS because there's like, I don't know, hundreds, thousands, maybe 1,000. There's a ton, but really you're just going to want to say, I want to do this. I'm going to look up the declaration, and then I'll write that and put it in there, and play around with it. Really playing around with it is the only way to learn and get comfortable with CSS. Okay, so we just went over a little bit on declarations as far as this piece here.
So,
and we talked about, oh, go ahead.
So Michael, I should have talked up sooner, but I was like, I'll just figure out while you're talking. I cannot get mine to I can't get the HTML index to link to the style.css.
Okay.
So I set up the CSS exactly how you have it. And then I do in the head, I have the link rel equals style sheet href styles.css, but then nothing's happening.
Okay, and over here you created styles.css
Mm-hmm.
in your files.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to share your screen really fast?
I have two computers going because I don't have Slack
Oh.
on my work computer that can handle Zoom.
No, you're good. Is anybody else following along or having an issue like that?
No, I'm just a dummy.
Yeah, yeah. I'm
Nate,
actually having that same.
Sam, you're having that same problem?
Yeah, I am. And same thing. I was like, oh, I'll just figure this out. I'm sure it's just me.
Do you want to share your screen, Sam? And we can take a look?
Yeah. Let me do that.
Let's do it.
Where are we? Wait, am I sharing yet?
No, hold on. Oh, there you go. Okay, perfect.
All right.
Awesome. Okay. So we have our thing. The oboist who loved tubas. That guy sucked. Do you suck on an oboe? Is that how you play an oboe?
No, it's a completely nonsensical joke. I couldn't think of anything that was actually funny.
I like it. You got me laughing anyway. Okay. We have our head tag. We have our head element. Meta carset UTF-8. Okay. So there's a couple little pieces. So in our meta tag there, at the end of line 4, right before your closing bracket, you have a /.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and remove that. So you can just have that, bring that bracket all the way up to the end quote there.
Okay.
Okay, let's do the same thing for our link tag. That might be the problem with the link tag.
Let's see.
I didn't have the / because I'm not a dummy. I'm kidding, Sam.
Oh wait, as soon as I saved it, it added the /.
Oh, it did that automatically. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. No worries, that's fine. And yeah, that is for a self-closing tag. That is sometimes the syntax people use, because you'll notice, at the H1 tag ends in the /H1 or whatever. So I think you can kind of do it both ways.
Okay.
That's kind of more old school syntax, but it doesn't really matter, I guess. I thought that might be messing with StackBlitz though. Style sheet.
You should comment out the doctype HTML too. You didn't do that.
Oh yes.
Oh,
Yes.
there we go.
Shoot, I'm sorry.
There we go.
I think that's
Nice.
Oh, you just comment out the. Yeah, there we go. Magic.
Wow. There we go. Well
Colin,
done,
is that
John.
your problem too?
Show that one more time. What's the commenting out?
Command / and comment out doctype HTML. And I know that's kind of confusing because it is a part and an important part of valid HTML, but StackBlitz is kind of stupid and it's not really built for static sites. So it's usually people aren't writing plain HTML in here, and for some reason that throws it off.
I figured it was a very simple mistake.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That was it.
That was it? Okay, good. Whew.
Yep.
Oh yeah. Okay. Great. Anybody else having any other issues with getting to this point? Do you get your text to turn red? You get all your other stuff to go? So yeah, we went over declarations a little bit. Once again, the declaration is just, where you are writing your specific styles, like color, red, background color, blue. Those are declarations. They have a name, colon, the change you're making, and then a semicolon. And as always, where do we go? What website do we go to if we want to look up these different pieces of HTML, CSS, or JavaScript? MDN, Mozilla Developer Network. And Mozilla is the company that makes like Firefox and Firebird and Thunderbird, that kind of stuff. So they're awesome. This is like the Bible for everything code related you want to look up. Like try to find. Kyra, what'd you say?
I was just about to say, it was like, it's the Bible itself.
It is the Bible for this stuff. Some of it can be a little dense, but if you can, try to make it a habit of checking here first, and then check other sources if you need to. For declarations, CSS. And one hint about when you are Googling things, like if you're trying to figure out syntax or something's broken, always put the language last. I don't know if first or last matters, but always put it in there. So like if you're looking for something in JavaScript, you're looking at loops or something, put JS at the end of it. Otherwise you might get, stuff for a different language. So this will get you nice specific results really quickly. So CSS reference, let's look at the syntax for CSS. Let's see if we can pull up declarations. Declaration blocks. Cool. So this is great. This is a great resource. Everything on Mozilla is awesome. You guys can take a look at this page if you want to, if you need to remember any of this, but really it's just colon, semicolon. If your CSS is not working, if you ever find that like some of your CSS is working, but a bunch of stuff you wrote is not showing up, it might be because you're missing a semicolon. The way CSS will work is that it will work up until a point it sees a missing semicolon, and then it ignores everything else. So keep that in mind, that you're not really going to get errors per se, but it just might kind of stop working. So CSS can be a little finicky in that sense. Okay, there we go. Okay, we do have, actually, there's one other piece I wanted to look at before we go into the accessibility stuff. The other piece I wanted to talk about was specificity. So specificity is something really important when it comes to CSS and cascading style sheets and how they work. So first of all, we're going to kind of change our example here a little bit. So within our body element, let's comment out everything inside of our body element. So our H1 all the way down, get rid of our main element. So what you can do is you can highlight all of that. And then when it's highlighted, hit Command/. And this is going to create a multi-line comment for you. Once again, this works in all languages. This is a lot faster than trying to type out, the actual comment. You'll be able to do that really quickly. And the nice thing is you can just highlight it again and uncomment. So definitely get comfortable with that Command/command, your keyboard shortcut. So let's comment those guys out. And we're going to create a new line underneath that comment. And we're going to create a bunch of div elements. So let's create some divs. And there's another cool command that is Option-Shift down or up arrow. And that will actually just duplicate your line, which is really nice. I like that one a lot. Okay, so
wait, how do again?
So if you hold Option and Shift, if you're on a Mac, and then up or down arrow. So like if you had this div line in the middle here. So if I wanted to duplicate this line above, you do Option-Shift up arrow, and then that would duplicate it above. If I wanted to duplicate it below, you do Option-Shift down, and then that duplicates it below.
Dang.
It's really nice. It's really nice. No worries if you, it's the comment keyboard shortcut is more important to remember right now than that one, but that can be handy. And Sean wanted it. Okay. So we have a bunch of divs. We have 4 divs here. Let's make it 5. Okay, so we have 5 div elements. This stands for content division, which really this doesn't mean a whole lot other than it's like a box. It's a box to put stuff in. And we don't need to put anything in there yet because we're just going to kind of hit that with our HTML. Currently, they're empty boxes that you can't see. They're not really doing anything. We just see our orange background here. But let's go into our CSS. And we are going to write a selector to select our divs, which is just the name of the tag. And this is an element selector because we're selecting that HTML element. And then we're going to create a block. And then inside of here, let's give this a border. And once again, like I said, I know I have some of these things memorized, but if you wanted to put a border on a div, you'd probably just be like, I'm going to look up, how I do that. I'm going to look up that declaration. And then you figure it out very quickly. So we're going to do border. And the syntax for this is you put in the size of it and whether or not it's solid, dotted, dashed, whatever. Usually you do solid and we'll do red. Okay. So you'll see that kind of just looks like a bunch of dashed lines because it doesn't have anything inside of it. It has no height. So we're going to give it a quick little height. of 10 pixels and put our semicolon at the end there. And oh, that's kind of weird. Okay. I'm going to do solid. It's a little easier to see. And then one other thing we're going to add in is we're going to put some margin in of 5 pixels. And what this does, the margin just gives it spacing between them. There'll be a lot more we go into when we talk about the CSS box model, which is going to be really fun. But for now, it's just visually making it easier for us to see the example. Okay, so we have a bunch of red boxes. So this rule applied to all of the div elements, because that's how CSS selectors work. Now, if I put in another CSS block here, another rule that's the same rule that also targets the divs, and if I make the border 2 pixels solid green, what do you guys think is going to happen?
It's going to turn green.
What do you think will turn green?
Nothing.
The div. Everything.
The divs. Nothing or everything. Okay, Colin says nothing. Sean says everything. So we're gonna do, okay, let's put the same rule there. Border 2px solid green. Okay. So it changed everything. But we still have our height and the margin that we added for the spacing. So why did this happen? This seems kind of weird. We told it to do one thing, and then we put in another command that was the same, similar, but it has a different value, a different color. Why did it change everything for us? So the reason that this happened is because the hint is in the name of CSS. It is a cascading style sheet. So the style sheet part definitely makes sense. This is where we put stuff to make stuff look cool. We had colors, we had design, we had images, sizes, rearrange stuff. The style sheet part makes sense, but the cascade, this is what the cascade is. The cascade is when you start at the bottom, because this is the way our computer is going to read CSS and apply it to our document. So it starts at line 1. It says, okay, cool, body. I'm going to go grab the body element. I'm going to give it a background color of orange. Boom, cool. It did that. It goes down paragraph tag. Cool. I'm going to go find all of the paragraph tags. I'm going to give them the color red, the text color red. It did that. Then we hit div and it says, okay, I'm going to find all of the content division elements and I'm going to give them a border of 2 pixels solid red, height, margin. Then it says, okay, div, I'm going to go find all of the elements, the content division elements, and I'm going to give them a border 2px solid green. So basically at this point, we also have these, but these are just implied because they have been applied on lines 11 and 12. So the way that CSS works is that further down, you can override values because the last thing you put into it is going to take precedence over what was above it. And when we talk about precedence and we talk about specificity, there's going to be a lot more details that we get into in the future as far as how CSS works, because obviously, you're not always going to want to change everything to be green, or everything to be red, or everything to be styled one specific way. But you probably want to have a lot of divs on your page. You want to use a content division element to break things into boxes and put them in spaces and put things where they should be. So what if we just wanted to change the third div element to be green? How could we do that then? Because we have, we tried with the div, but the div is going to get everything. How can we be more specific and add more specificity to our page here?
You assign it.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Kyra.
You assign it a class or like an ID, right?
Exactly, you could assign it a class or an ID. Okay. So we talked a lot about attributes when we talk about the rel attribute, the href attribute, the charset attribute, however you say that, the lang attribute. So one of the most common attributes is the class attribute and then also the ID attribute. So let's add a class attribute of special, give it the value of special to the third div. So in the third div, give it a class attribute with the value of special. And then to go with Kyra's example, let's go ahead and take our last one, give the last div an ID attribute. And let's give that the value of super special or something like that. Okay, so when we add those in, nothing changed. Did we expect anything to change? Not really. What we did was we basically just said, okay, you guys are a bunch of nameless, minions and you're all divs. And then we said, well, let's give 2 of you guys a name tag, and you, the third one, your name is special, but it's not as special as super special, which is the last guy who has an ID. And we're going to talk in a second about the difference between class and ID. But for now, let's see if we can use that. So if we wanted to go into our CSS and use this new attribute to be able to style that, we can do that with our CSS. And that's going to allow us to add specificity to our CSS file. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in here and we're going to start with a dot. So starting with the period with the dot, that is the syntax for the class attribute selector. So this is a class attribute selector. So it starts with a dot, and that means, okay, CSS is talking about a class. So the class is special. And then we're going to do our same exact syntax. It's always a block. Sorry, I have a bunch of gnats flying around here. So we're going to create that block. And now we've created a CSS rule with a class attribute selector of special. So now let's turn this color green, or what do we do? Border, sorry. So let's do the same thing we did before. And let's put border 2 pixels solid green, the exact same thing, or however many pixels, 20 pixels, 102, whatever you like. Okay, so now we see that we took our third div and we turned it green. And it's cool that we were able to just do one single element like that. So that added specificity. And obviously you can see how this is really valuable when you're working on a real web page because you want things to be different, but maybe you probably want if you want all of your little pieces on your website to have like a drop shadow or a box shadow, because that's just like the style you want to go for. It allows your CSS to be much more concise if you say, okay, they're all in divs. So I'm going to use the element selector of div, and I'm going to give all of them a drop shadow. But then I want the third one to, have a background color of yellow because it's really important, or it's like a little article aside. And I want that to kind of stand out. Then you could say, okay, cool. I already have the drop shadow because I added that to all my divs. But now I can just put a class onto my div element. I'm going to give it a class attribute of, probably describing, what you want it to be, orange or something, or, has background or special. And then you can target that in your CSS with the class attribute selector to make it special. So that's kind of a cool thing you can do here. Let's say, for example, that instead of a border here, we had a background color of red. Oh, sorry. So it's not. So you see how that just kind of broke? This is a good example. So I put background color in there, forgetting that I needed to change more here. So CSS isn't really going to give you errors. That's one thing that can be kind of frustrating here. But it doesn't understand 2px solid red. This is not a valid part of the background color piece there. So what we needed to do is change it to just red. But it's funny because it just took everything off of the div because that didn't work at all for that declaration. Okay, so we give that a background color of red, and let's make this guy more pixels. Let's make that 5 pixels. Okay, so here we can kind of see more of that example that I was talking about. Can you guys see this okay? All right. And also, is this font size big enough? Do you need me to bump this up?
That's better. Yeah.
I totally should have done that at the beginning.
Yeah,
sorry.
That's much better.
Whoops. You guys are the guinea pigs.
I was gonna mention that, but I felt like maybe waiting to see if
I figured it out.
I just wanted to see if anybody else was seeing it as small as I was.
Thanks a lot, Colin.
You're welcome.
Okay, sorry about that, guys. Okay, so now we see that we have a green border on this guy, but we also have that red background, which that's kind of cool. That kind of, highlights more of the power of CSS because we can give all the divs a background color, but we could only get, if we just wanted special to have a border that was solid green, we could do that with this guy. Now, the other thing about classes, and the real difference between classes and IDs, is that classes are meant to be used multiple times. So you'll often find yourself saying, okay, I want everything to have that drop shadow, but I only want some of them to have a green border. You know, I want all of them to have that red background, but I only want some of them to have a green border. But it's probably going to be more than one. So in that case, you would use a class. So we have our special class here. So let's go ahead and copy our class attribute. And let's put it on this first one as well. So we're going to put it on that first div. So we added that special class again to our first div here. Now we see that we have a green border. And then the third one also has a green border, which is great. So this is valid. This is what a class is intended to be used for, is being used multiple times in our HTML. And then we can target it with our CSS to do things with it. When we talk about an ID, this is very, very, very similar. It's going to do almost exactly the same thing that a class does, except you can only use it once. It is the identification for this one element. It is the element's identification, and no other element can have that identification. So this is really important for CSS, but it's even more important when we get to JavaScript. So for now, we'll just think about it in CSS terms, but an ID, there can only be one ID. The ID is like the Highlander, there can only be one. So if we go in, we can add an ID, okay, what do we call it? Super special? And let's give that a border, a purple border of 5 pixels. 5px, solid purple. Okay. So we see our last one now turn purple. So you only want, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't even talk about this syntax. So an ID starts with a hash. So the hash sign, the pound sign, is how we prefix an ID selector. Sorry, that's really important. So ID selector prefixed by hash. Okay, kind of that guy out. And then class selector prefixed by dot. Okay, cool. So that's important syntax, is for how we access these things. And this is we're getting into like the meat of some CSS here. And like I said, there's not a ton of syntax that we need to memorize or learn. That's one of the important pieces that you need to know. Classes are prefixed by a dot. IDs are prefixed by a hash sign. If you did this, what are these looking for then? Like if I forgot to put those in there, it didn't work. But what is our CSS looking for if I say special and I say super special like that? What did I create? It's a certain
element. Is that the right term?
Exactly. Yep. And what is the first piece of the CSS? What is that called? It's called the selector. So that would be an element selector. So that basically means it's looking for an HTML element of special. And it's going to say, okay, I don't see that, so I can't do anything with it. I have this means nothing to me. As soon as you add that dot, it says, ooh, okay, cool. Now I'm looking for a class of special. I'm not looking for an element. And then as soon as you put that hash sign in front of it, it says, okay, but sorry, did I say ID up here? It's looking for a class. And then this one is looking for the ID. Cool. So that's important syntax. And there's more. We'll go more into specificity later on, but I don't want to convolute things or make it too confusing here. Certain things have different weight as far as how important they are to the CSS, and you can override things. We've already seen an example of overriding if we use it twice. If we use a class selector or an element selector twice. So like if we did dot special again, and we did border solid blue. So we're going to see that our last instance of the special class selector overrode the first instance of the special class selector because it is a cascading style sheet. What it applies cascades from the top down. Okay, sorry, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse on that one. Sweet. Did anybody have any questions about selectors, ID selectors, class selectors, the syntax? Do you want to go over anything again?
So Michael, with the, like when you're setting the pixels, are those literal pixels? So will it show up different on a display that has a denser pixel count?
Oh, I love that. It's a very nerdy question and great. So pixel, PX, actually has a specific value in CSS as a language. So when I say PX, it's actually like 0.93, like 0.0093 inches or something like that. It's a literal like size, and it doesn't have anything to do with the pixel of the device. And the reason for that is because, you know, if tomorrow Apple comes out with a monitor that is like the super duper extra Retina HD that, you know, breaks a pixel down into 100 different pixels, you know, and you have, you know, 1 million pixels in your display, that would just ruin the web. The web would completely fall apart if all of a sudden 1px meant like that new tiny pixel. There's also not, well, there may be a way, but it seems unlikely that, you know, your CSS would know what monitor it's on or know where to get that information from. So when we say a pixel, that's actually very misleading. And that's a great question. That's awesome. Yeah, because a lot of designers and a lot of developers encourage people to move away from pixels. There's something called an EM that is basically like one EM is in reference to the base text size. So you can use EMs to kind of size things based off of the size of the text in your document. So if we said, you know, font size of 10 pixels or, you know, font size 1 EM for the whole entire thing, and then we bumped up the font size to be like 2 or 3 times as big, and all of the rest of our sizing in our CSS is following EMs, they would adjust to be larger or smaller depending on what its base text size is. So that's something that designers use a lot. And the EM element of measure is like more common, and it's been around for a really long time actually, which is kind of cool. So sorry, that was a little bit of a rabbit hole, but yeah, great question. Pixel does not mean device pixel. It means CSS pixel.
I have a question.
Yo, Joseph, what's up?
So if we make up our own element, I noticed like CSS will pick it up, but is that like breaking a common convention for scrapers and parsers if you just start making your own?
Yeah, that's also a really good question. So you might say in the HTML, like, why are we using classes at all? If I could just write a element, you know, for saying, okay, class special, why don't I just do special like that, you know, and create an element that's custom like that. So there's a few different reasons. First of all, the way that the browser interprets this, I'm actually not 100% sure if it totally ignores it or if it just treats it like a div. But like, let's see if we put stuff in there. Okay, so it does show up, and I have a feeling this shows up like a div. Let's see. Okay, no, it actually does show the special tag here in the browser. So it takes that. This is a bit of a test now. I'm not 100% sure what's going to happen here. Oh wait, no, that wasn't stuff. That was special. Okay, so it is able to target that. So you could, as we just tried, it's possible to do that. The reason that you really never, ever, ever, ever want to do this is because it has no semantic meaning. And when we talk about semantic meaning, this is something we'll talk about a lot more in the future, but semantic meaning in HTML and semantic HTML, which is a term you're going to hear often, is basically writing HTML that has meaning. And writing HTML that has meaning is really important for a few different aspects of the web. First of all, you'll see a lot of websites and web pages, they'll just have div, 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 div. Everything is inside of a div, and their H1 tags are all over the place, and their P tags are made to be really big, to be a title for the page. And when you do that, like let's say we, you know, if we took a paragraph tag And we made a paragraph tag our header instead of an H1 tag here. So whoops, sorry, let me go ahead and comment this out. So if we took this guy and we said, you're no longer an H1, you're a P tag. And I'm going to use this paragraph tag and I'm going to style it to be really big. And you know, I could go in with my CSS and target this and make this look really big and bold, and it would look like a title. But when someone comes in with a screen reader and they're navigating our page, they're going to be hitting tab, and you know, the VoiceOver modifier arrow keys is going to take you through the important pieces of a web page. And obviously somebody, you know, as a sighted user, when we look at the page, we look at the bold headlines. I look and I see, okay, cool, tell me a joke. I know that that has something, you know, the smaller text underneath that relates to that headline, that header. And then there's gonna be another header that's like, you know, contact information or whatever. So visually, we parse through pages really quickly by skimming them like that. Screen readers replicate the way that our brains work when we do that by allowing the users to be like, okay, you know what? I just want to look at the headers on this page. I don't even know if I want to read it, rather than having to tab through every single thing on the page, every single word and piece of text, so that they are having that read aloud to them until they realize it's not what they're looking for. They didn't want to be there. So you want to use headers so that people can use that assistive technology to be able to navigate your pages. So when they hit tab, they can see H1, tell me a joke. Be like, well, okay, I don't want to be here. I don't want to hear jokes. Then they can leave your page. If that's just a paragraph tag, they're going to hit their button to try to find a header, and it's going to be like, no header information found. They'll be like, okay, well, now I have to parse through this whole stupid page. It removes semantic meaning from everything. So it takes away the semantic meaning. I could make this look identical to an H1 tag, but we are crippling the usability of our page by doing that. So we want to use semantic HTML. And the reason that this has meaning is because there is an HTML spec, a specification for HTML to say these are valid HTML tags. And when we talk about valid HTML, that means HTML that can be used by everyone, HTML that has a meaning, and HTML that is formatted and structured correctly. So if we dropped, you know, the H1 tag off the end of here, this is no longer valid HTML. It still spits out onto the page. It still renders stuff. It still does stuff, but this is invalid HTML. So we want to be writing valid HTML that is also semantically correct. And like I said, we'll talk about that more in the future, but that's the main reason. You could name this whatever you want, but it loses all of its meaning and it loses all of its built-in functionality. And not just screen readers, SEO. So search engine optimization is going to look at your header tags and say, okay, this site's kind of about this and this and this. And it uses a similar flow as a screen reader to do that. But yeah, that's a great question.
Can I piggyback off of that a little bit?
Yeah.
So the way someone else put it to me is you always want to make your code readable for the next person. Because the last thing you want is you don't want a colleague to be tracking you down and asking you what all these like unique elements mean or why they're given different names. So there's kind of like an etiquette of like how you structure things and how you name your things, because more than likely in a job, you're not going to be the only one looking at it, and you want it to be dry code, and you want everybody else to be able to read it accurately. So.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. That's 100%. That's 100% true. And that's kind of like the, you know, the slashes at the end of these self-closing tags. So you can do this. A lot of times you'll run into little conventions like this where teams just prefer it one way or the other because of, you know, their own personal preference, or it's less characters or whatever. So, you know, even though both of these are valid HTML, you know, you usually if you start doing it one way, you should stick with it if it's just a preference thing. But yeah, and exactly like Colin said, you know, you are writing code for other people to read 99% of the time. So great, cool, great questions. Thanks, guys. I love it. Okay, so this, I don't know if we want to get into this too much. We're about at an hour and a half here. Okay, let's get into let's dive into the homework a little bit, since we're pretty much at an hour and a half. 1 second. Okay, guys. Can everybody access? I think I recently sent this link out into Slack, but does everybody have access to the Dev Delta GitHub space?
Yep.
Okay. So if you guys go in there, if we can all navigate into that, and we are going to go into curriculum. And hold on one second. Okay, so this is where the lesson plan is for today's that we just went over. I'm gonna push this up into the dev delta space so that it's not on my personal GitHub. But you can look at this guy. Let's see, did I leave any notes on there? Okay, great. So this is just a text markdown version basically of the lesson we just went through. If you pull up what I just sent in general. And the homework is at the very end of this page. If you have any questions or any, you know, if you want to go back and look at any of the syntax or some of the examples or the like the annotated screenshots we have, they're all within this document. And at the very, very bottom, you should see the homework section. Oh, it looks like that didn't show up correctly. Okay, cool. So in the homework section, you'll be able to see something like this. Bump this up so we can read it. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to take our joke that we just wrote here and we're going to style it and make it look super cool and just make it fun. Go totally crazy. I want you guys to go nuts with this. Add as much stuff as you want, add as much HTML as you want. I want you to really like just write a ton of code, even if it's wrong or crappy, like just do a bunch, because writing a bunch of code is the only way you're gonna really learn this stuff. And CSS is a fun one in particular to just kind of just, you know, write tons and tons of lines because it's easy to do. So basically what you're gonna do is you're gonna look up how to change things using CSS, and then you're just gonna throw them in different CSS blocks and see what happens. And just build it. It should be fun. You'll be able to change things really quickly and see things show up on your page over here. So hopefully that's fun. I was just going to show you this one. So this is my joke site, very 90s of 5 that I did. So why did the chicken go to the seance? To get to the other side. So good. I did not come up with that. That's incredible. Cool. So yeah, this is all just a bunch of crappy, horrible 90s CSS things people were into. But yeah, I want you guys to take your page, take your joke, put a joke in there, put a good joke in there, and make it look crazy, add a bunch of styling, and just really have fun with it. So in your homework here, I have the starter code in StackBlitz if you need to pull it down, if there's something wrong with your code that you wrote. I encourage you to use the code that you just wrote, because then you're gonna have a full-blown application that you did yourself from start to finish, writing the HTML from absolute scratch, which is satisfying. So I think you should do that. Write a lot of code, go crazy with your CSS. And then I listed some main goals in the bullet points here. So the homework will take a little bit longer than last time. I think the HTML homework was really, really short. So let me know if this is too long, if you want me to shorten up the homework. But yeah, so we're going to create a CSS file. We already did that. Link it, add a hilarious joke. And then the 4th bullet point, keep the punchline hidden and then have it revealed in some way. So this is really going to just take some research. So I want you guys to come up with a plan. Be like, how do I want this to look? How do I want to hide my punchline? Do I scroll down to it? Do I, hover over it? Whatever. Just figure out a way that you think would be fun or something that you want to do to reveal it. Maybe it's colors, you're using colors to hide it or something like that. And then just look it up. Just look up how to do that. Break that problem down in little small pieces and say, okay, well, how do I do stuff when I hover? Then you're going to want to look up, style with CSS on hover. And you'll definitely find some stuff. And like I said, try to lean towards MDN. If you can look at the Mozilla Developer Networks page, do that to find stuff for your CSS reference. But wherever, do this research on your own. And then hopefully you can, have the joke show up and you hover over it, or you do something and it pops up. And then make sure you add at least one image and make that accessible by using the alt attribute, the alternative text attribute, which this picture is not showing up, and this is actually the alt text showing up for that there. So there you can see one use of putting alt text in. I need to fix that, but it even helps sighted users. Okay, try to use at least 2 different fonts. So you're gonna wanna look up how to change the font from the system font to a different font. So you're gonna wanna do that. That's gonna be done with CSS as well. Like I said, all of this is gonna be CSS and HTML. You don't need to do any JavaScript here. If you want to go crazy and add JavaScript, you totally can, but none of this requires any JavaScript, just CSS and HTML. Use the element selector, which just targets the tag. So we definitely want to do a few of those. Also use the class selector, which is prefixed with the dot, with the period, when you add a class attribute to your HTML, and try to style multiple things with that to practice that. And then also use an ID selector for some different places. Just remember, whatever value you give your ID selector, that has to be unique. And I don't know if I clarified this before, but you can have multiple IDs in your HTML. It's just that the values can never be the same. Like if you have ID equals special, you can have another ID that equals special 2 or special 3 or, foobar or something totally different, but you can't have another ID on another element that equals special. I don't think I clarified that before. And then lastly, or, close to last, add a hyperlink that points to an MDN page where you learned and implemented something on this project that you're doing. So any document that you read that you're like, oh, cool, I learned that, I copied that over, I changed it, and I learned how to do something that we didn't cover in class. Put a hyperlink to that page so that we can go look at something you learned, and then put borders on stuff. It's fun. You do dotted, dash, solid, whatever. And then we have some stretch goals. If that's super easy for you guys, then you can try to make a hyperlink turn orange after you click it. Add some movement using CSS transitions. That's definitely more advanced. And then read about and use Flexbox to center the content on your page. That's also more advanced. And we'll go over these more in the future. So, and then I linked out my example on CodePen. You guys are going to be doing your work within StackBlitz. And hopefully that's fun. I hope that's fun. Do you guys feel like you have enough tools to move forward to make some changes and do some stuff with CSS?
Absolutely, yes.
Dope. Hold on. Here we go. Talk about accessibility and talk about some of the pieces of CSS that can fall into that category. So when we talk about styling and design and CSS and what our website looks like, it's pretty unlikely that, the first thing that comes to your mind is like, well, how do I make this work for blind people? Because you're talking about colors and things that they're never going to see, which is a bummer because there is a lot of accessibility things that we need to consider. And one of the things that I want to kind of dispel when we talk about accessibility is the idea that there are normal users and there are blind users. That's true. But there's also people with low vision. There's also people with motion sensitivity. There's people with color blindness. There's people who use, single input devices that, there's people who have, I don't remember the name of this, but there's a problem where like their eyes will occasionally flutter and like they get like these vibrations where things look really blurry for a certain amount of time, but then it goes back to normal. There's people who have, like I said, I think I already said seizures, but, they could be impacted by changing colors and flashing lights, things like that. So visual representation on your page absolutely needs to consider accessibility. Just because a blind person isn't going to see it doesn't mean that it doesn't have an accessibility implication. So let's look at an example really quickly. So this goofy 90s example that I did here, I purposely put in a couple failures as far as accessibility goes. So first of all, when we hover over the joke answer and we see this, is there anything you guys can think of that might be inaccessible about this piece right here?
Well, background
that you have
pattern
to
with
hover
white
over it.
text.
What's up?
I was just
Joseph,
saying that you have to
go
hover
ahead.
over it.
Okay, yeah, you do have to hover over it. Awesome. That is absolutely a potential problem. Joseph, what were you saying?
Well, you have like a light background pattern with light text, so it kind of like jumbles the characters a little.
Absolutely, 100%. Both of those things are the total reason I did this, was because of both of those things. So there is no contrast. There's a very low contrast between this white and this pink. So this is something that is really hard for people to see who have color blindness or, people who have low vision or, blurry vision, cataracts, things like that. This is very inaccessible. This as well is totally inaccessible because when we hide things, so if you do like display hidden, which is a CSS property you can use, when we do display hidden, that also hides it from a screen reader. So if we did display hidden and then on hover, we made this display block, which is a way to visually bring it back into the document. then what is our screen reader going to see? Our screen reader is going to come in and it's going to say header 1, lols or cakes. And then you're going to enter the content and it's going to say paragraph tag. Why did the chicken go to the seance? And then it's going to say content. No, or it's going to say like hover for answer. It's going to read this little div here actually, which is also a problem because why do we need to read hover for answer? Anything that has to do with hovering or kind of, mouse interaction, we don't really need to read that to a screen reader. So there's a way we could avoid that.
How would hover work with a television or smartphone?
Yeah, absolutely. That's another great point. So hover does not work on hover is actually really bad on smartphones. So on smartphones, you'll notice a lot of websites, if you like touch a button, sometimes you'll see it just like outline it or change the styling instead of actually touching it. And then you have to click it again to go somewhere. So that's a lot of the times is a bug where, tapping on the screen like initializes the hover state rather than the active state. And that's a problem that you have to mitigate using something called media queries, which is where you can style things based off of how big or small your screen is. And that's something we'll get into a little later on. That's a little bit more advanced with CSS. Yeah, hovering is definitely a problem. If we're just talking about desktop computers, though, we don't want to read that to a screen reader because they don't need to know about something that requires a hover. And then if this is only displayed when you hover over it, the next thing they're going to hear is the footer. So they're going to hear the setup of the joke, and then it's just going to skip straight down to like this image, and then it's going to skip to the footer. So they're hugely missing out on like the whole site's broken basically for somebody who uses a screen reader. There's a couple ways we could fix this. So the way that I chose to do it here is when you hover over this, instead of making it display none and then show up and actually be displayed, its opacity is set to 0 when you don't hover over it. So it's there, but it's just invisible. So if a screen reader came through, they're going to hear this, and then they're going to hear it read to them because it's still there. It just doesn't have any opacity. It's like a pane of glass, and then you continue on. So that's one thing. And I mean, and that's not like a standard that like that's the answer for certain things, but I want that to put like, a little brainworm in your head, just thinking about, those are problems you have to solve as well. And those are interesting development problems, is to say, this works great, but it doesn't work for a subset of users. How can I make this work for a certain subset of users? So that's the kind of thing you can think about. And that's a pretty simple solution here. That isn't complicated or, doesn't really add a lot of work into this. There are other ways you could totally do it, other things that you could implement. And then as far as this hover for answer piece goes, there's something that I used that is an HTML attribute that's a special attribute. And it is an aria attribute. So ARIA attributes. This is something that I encourage you to read about and look into. And if you guys can add this to your homework, that is major bonus points, because that's awesome if you can do that. So what aria attributes are is what it stands for. Let me go back again. Come on. Hold up. Okay, so what ARIA stands for is accessible, rich internet applications, which basically they are a set of HTML elements that you can add, a set of HTML attributes that you can add to any element that basically gives it special meaning for screen readers and special meaning for sighted users. So you could go in, and one of them that we're using in my example here is the aria-hidden. So you can set aria-hidden true on any element. And basically what this means is that you still see it. Any normal screen is going to display it. It works exactly like a normal paragraph tag. It doesn't change anything about how it's displayed. But when a screen reader comes through, this might as well not exist. So when a screen reader comes through and it sees that aria-hidden label, it totally ignores the content of the element that it's put on, which is great in this case, because this brings no value to a screen reader user. So we can use aria attributes to really modify our page to be better for our users. There's another thing that I added here. So if we look at this parent div, I added an aria label. So an aria label also doesn't do anything visually. It adds nothing to the page that the users will see it, and it does not change anything about the content division element, the div that it's on. What it does do is it's kind of the opposite of aria-hidden. It does read something to a screen reader user that will never be displayed to a sighted user. So in this case, instead of the comedic timing of waiting and then hovering over it, I just put an aria label on this parent container that says wait for it. So then if you come through this with a screen reader, it's going to say, why did the chicken go to the seance? And then you hit your next button, and it's going to say wait for it. And you hit your next button, and then it tells you the joke. So these are totally, you know, this isn't like necessary, or is it? I mean, this one in particular isn't really necessary. I don't know if that would actually bring a lot of value to a screen reader user, but it's great to keep that mindset, you know, as you're developing. Like, how can I make this more fun? How can I make this more seamless for people? Like, we spend so much time on like the perfect color, or like the perfect little border, or like how this hover effect works, or the material design library, or like how, you know, pretty our websites are. But no one spends any time on any little details that add joy to the experience of browsing for people who aren't sighted, or people who have low vision, or people who use a screen reader. So that's a huge thing that we can do to really make our website stand out. Like, none of those things are necessary, and none of these things will make your app, you know, pass an accessibility test more. It just makes it more user friendly. Just makes it a better website. You know, like, there's ugly websites and there's pretty websites, and there's ugly accessible websites and there's pretty accessible websites, and we want to be, you know, using these tools and developing with that in mind. So that is part of this example here. And yeah, I encourage you guys, if you can, try to use some aria attributes, and within the lesson plan, at the bottom, we link out to the aria attributes. Here we go. So the aria attributes link for the MDN article is on there. So go ahead and read up on that if you can. And that's pretty much it. That's really just the last piece I wanted to add in. And yeah, if you haven't done the VoiceOver tutorial, go do it. It's awesome. It's built into your Mac. I think you just hit Control-Option-H after you've hit your Command F5 to start it up. Just Google it if you can't figure that out. So Google how to get into the VoiceOver tutorial. It takes about 15 minutes. And it will just teach you the main way to navigate through things, and to get into a web page and like click in and click out of stuff. So it's really helpful.
Awesome.
That's it.